The airport clock in Phoenix read 9:45 a.m. Cindy had a few hours before her flight, so she decided to grab a coffee at a cozy cafe near the boarding gate. Sunlight streamed through the large panoramic windows, but despite the brightness, there was a strange tension in the air. Cindy ordered a cappuccino and chose a table tucked away from the crowd. A few minutes later, a man approached her. "Hey, mind if I join you?" he asked, smiling warmly, making it difficult to say no. Cindy glanced up at him, tall, athletic build, clean-cut face with a trace of stubble. A luggage tag on his travel bag read, Travis S., New Mexico. He looked like a typical businessman on the go, polished but unassuming. Feeling safe in the bustling airport crowd, Cindy nodded. "Do you fly often?" he asked as he motioned to the waitress for his own coffee. "Fairly often, but today's just a short visit home," Cindy answered with a smile. The conversation flowed effortlessly, maybe too effortlessly. Travis had a way of asking the right questions about work, hobbies, and future plans, slipping in the occasional compliment at just the right moment. Before Cindy realized it, an hour had passed. His attention and kindness made her feel relaxed, though there was something off, a slight chill behind his warm smile. "How about we have another round?" he asked as the waitress cleared the empty cups. "Oh, I should probably get going. I need to make it to my gate," Cindy said, glancing at her watch. "I'll walk you. It's not safe to rush to your flight alone," Travis said with a hint of ironic amusement. His words were friendly, but a nagging thought crossed Cindy's mind. Why is he being so polite? And why insist on walking me to the gate? She was about to politely decline when suddenly, everything shifted. The room felt smaller, the light dimmed, and the noise of the airport began to fade, as if drifting down a long tunnel. Cindy tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. Her head slumped to the side, and her fingers went numb. Panic surged as her vision blurred. "You look tired." "No worries. I've got you," Travis murmured, his voice soft and soothing. He leaned closer, slipping his arm under hers as she swayed. The last thing Cindy remembered was his whisper in her ear, "Just lie down. Everything's going to be fine." The world went dark. Jagged flashes of images flickered in her mind. An airport gate, Travis's face, sweaty hands brushing against her skin, and the rhythmic thud of wheels rolling across asphalt. She fought to wake up, but the dream was pulling her deeper and deeper. When she finally opened her eyes, she was met with total darkness. A cramped space, cold, hard surfaces pressed against her wrists and ankles. Her arms and legs were bound with plastic zip ties. Her lips were swollen and cracked from dryness, and a pounding headache throbbed in her skull. "You're awake," whispered a voice beside her. It was a girl, her tone soft but broken. "Don't make any sudden moves. They don't like that." Cindy turned her head with difficulty. In the dim light, she saw several other women, all looking exhausted and defeated. Their frightened eyes locked onto her, as if they knew something unspeakable was about to happen. "Where are we?" Cindy whispered, her voice barely audible. "A van. They're taking us to the auction," one of the girls said, swallowing nervously. "Don't try to fight it. There's nowhere to run." Cindy's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to piece together how she had ended up here, but the last moments at the airport were a blur. A cold, suffocating fear gripped her. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was real, and there was no waking up from it. Cindy stood in the suffocating room, where the sickly yellow glow from overhead lamps drained any glimmer of hope. This was an auction, but not one where paintings or antiques were sold. Here they sold people. Women were lined up like merchandise, while prospective buyers examined them with undisguised greed. The air reeked of sweat, fear, and a sweet yet repulsive odor that hinted at decay. Next to Cindy, one of the women sobbed quietly, wiping tears from her face. Those who had already resigned themselves to their fate stared at the ground, broken like soulless dolls. The distant door creaked open, and several men in business suits strolled in, cigars in hand, settling into their seats. ready to place their bids. When the auctioneer called Cindy's name, the room fell silent for a brief moment, broken only by a single voice. "No bids. She's mine," declared a confident voice. Cindy's heart sank as she recognized it. Mark Richards, a former client of her company, a successful businessman with a past few knew anything about. He had always seemed calm and collected, but now his gaze carried something far more sinister. Mark walked up onto the stage and approached her, a malicious smile stretching across his face. "I've been planning this moment for a long time," he whispered in her ear. "Ever since I first saw you, you seemed so proper and untouchable. But I always knew you belonged to me." Cindy tried to keep her composure, but his words sent chills down her spine. "Now you're mine, and I can do whatever I want with you," he murmured, gently brushing his fingers across her face. "You were always obedient, Cindy. Now you'll be even more useful. You'll help me expand a new smuggling network. And once you're done with that," he leaned closer, his voice dangerously soft, "you'll belong to me in every way." Terror gripped Cindy, but she knew that showing fear would only give him the upper hand. She had to find a way out. She remained in the grim warehouse for several days after the auction. Although Mark had officially bought her, her transfer was delayed. The organizers said paperwork needed to be finalized for the handoff. During that time, Cindy was kept in an isolated cell with Amanda and Liliana, another captive who had devised a plan to escape. Cindy knew they didn't have much time. Her body was weakened, and the days of hunger and sleepless nights were wearing down her will to fight. The women managed to break out of their cell, disguising themselves in guard uniforms. Sneaking through the dim hallways, they made it to the forest, each step burning with the promise of freedom. But it was all a trap. Just a few yards ahead, armed guards emerged from the shadows. They tackled the women to the ground and dragged them back to the camp. In the center of a floodlit clearing, Mark was waiting for them, his cold gaze sharp, and a sinister grin plastered across his face. "You've always been defiant, Liliana," he said, "but now you'll pay." The guards forced her to her knees. Mark raised a machete slowly, first running the blade over her fingers, severing them one by one to prolong her agony. Liliana screamed and gasped, her cries filling the night, while Amanda and Cindy could only watch in paralyzed horror. "Watch closely," Mark whispered to Cindy. "This is what happens to anyone who forgets their place." With a final, cold look, he swung the machete in one swift motion, severing Liliana's head. Her body collapsed onto the concrete, blood pooling around her in a dark red stain. "You're next if you try this again," Mark warned Cindy with a sneer. They were dragged back to their cell, and Cindy now understood. This wasn't just a prison. It was a trap, one that no one escaped alive. But something stirred deep inside her. Not just fear, a burning need to survive, and to get revenge. Realizing that direct defiance meant death, Cindy decided to adapt to the rules of this hell. She observed how the guards treated the other women and noticed that Luis, one of the guards, thrived on exercising power over those who seemed weak. She decided to exploit his weakness. Every day, she found a way to interact with him. A lingering glance, a few words of gratitude. Soon, Luis started hanging around her cell more often, occasionally bringing food or water. His fascination grew, and eventually he made her an offer. "If you play your cards right, I'll help you escape. I've got friends in Mexico." At first, it felt like a chance, a way out. Luis began forming a plan, promising to smuggle her across the border under the guise of being his wife. But he warned her they'd have to move fast and stay under the radar. Night would be their window. When everything was ready, Luis led her out of the warehouse. The cool night air kissed Cindy's skin for the first time in what felt like forever. Her heart raced, every step filling her with hope for freedom. But deep inside, unease whispered that something was wrong. They drove to a remote hangar outside the city. Luis ordered her out of the car, and as soon as Cindy stepped onto the ground, the truth hit her. It was a trap. A group of men waited in the shadows. One of them scanned her like merchandise. Luis wiped the sweat from his brow and grinned. In this world, only the liars survive. Cindy froze, realizing no help was coming. She had made a grave mistake trusting him. Luis clamped handcuffs on her wrists, but the second he looked away, Cindy snatched a jagged piece of metal from the ground and plunged it into his throat. Warm blood sprayed over her hands as Luis gasped, choking on his own breath as he crumpled to the ground. The men recoiled in shock, but Cindy gave them no time to react. She bolted into the darkness, her only thought being survival. Her legs burned with exertion, but adrenaline kept her moving forward. As the sound of shouts and pounding footsteps echoed behind her, one thing became crystal clear: she would never be a victim again. From now on, she played by her own rules. Cindy ran through the forest, her heart pounding with pain and fear. Her bare feet left bloody prints on branches and rocks. Each breath was sharp, like a blade. Behind her, branches cracked. They were coming. Mark's men tracked her, hidden among the shadows of the trees. When they found out Luis planned to sell her to new traffickers, they set out to make sure Cindy wouldn't escape. Bullets whizzed overhead, slamming into trees. Her lungs burned, her legs wobbled, but stopping wasn't an option. The only goal was survival. Her pursuers shouted to each other, "Find her!" She couldn't have gotten far. The darkness of the forest offered no comfort. She could feel death breathing down her neck. Just a little longer and they'd catch her. But then she saw it. A gas station ahead, glowing like a phantom island in a sea of terror. She dashed toward it, ignoring the pain in her muscles and the torn skin on her feet. Pushing through the last bushes, she burst onto the lit forecourt. An old van stood by the pump, its doors wide open, and no one in sight. Her eyes frantically scanned for keys, and there they were, dangling from the ignition. Cindy jumped in and twisted the key. The engine roared to life, like a beast suddenly awakened. She slammed on the gas, slamming her chest against the steering wheel as the van lurched forward, crashing through the fence. Gunshots rang out behind her, bullets denting the metal. Cindy ducked but kept driving, her sweaty, bloodied hands slipping on the wheel. She pressed the gas pedal to the floor, pushing the engine to its limit. In the rearview mirror, headlights appeared. Her pursuers were closing in, firing as they chased her. Cindy knew, if they caught her, it would be over. Clenching her jaw, she spotted a checkpoint ahead on the highway. Police. When she reached the checkpoint, the officers were already paid off by Mark to return her. They'd received a tip about her escape and knew who she was, but the money had been too good to refuse. One officer, a stocky man with a cold gaze, looked at her with faint amusement, his lips curling in a bitter smirk, but doubt flickered in his eyes. He had seen too much during his time in law enforcement, too many horrors tied to human trafficking. This situation was all too familiar. His own sister had fallen into the hands of traffickers, and he had sworn that someday he would help someone like her. "I know," he whispered, leaning in close. "If you want to survive, run to that truck. My brother will help you." Cindy froze for a second, then instinct kicked in. She sprinted toward the truck as its door swung open. A man with a worn, kind face appeared inside. "Hurry, get in," he urged, pulling her up. It was Manuel, the officer's brother. He slammed the door shut and hit the gas as Mark's men stopped at the checkpoint, arguing with the police. Cindy leaned against the cab's wall, breathing hard. Her body ached, her hands shook, but for the first time in what felt like forever, a faint spark of hope flickered inside her. Manuel glanced back at her briefly. "Hang tight," he said quietly. "We're heading somewhere they won't find you." The van sped into the night, carrying her farther from her pursuers and closer to a new hope. Unless, of course, this hope turned out to be just another trap. Cindy, exhausted by fear and hopelessness, finds refuge in a remote monastery nestled among jagged mountain peaks. The stone walls, shrouded in mist, feel like a place where she might finally escape the horrors of her past. Yet even here, within these ancient walls steeped in centuries of silence, she senses the shadows of her pursuers lurking behind every corner. The nuns take her in without question, their presence ghostly, their eyes like deep, bottomless voids. Cindy is given a new name, But deep inside, she knows that her true self will never disappear. Months pass, and as the fog of adjustment slowly begins to lift, Cindy decides to send a brief letter to her family. Her hand trembles as she forms the words on the paper. "I'm alive. Don't look for me. I'm safe, but I won't be coming back. I love you all." The letter is not just a gesture of reassurance. It's her way of severing the last fragile ties to the life she once had. Each word feels like a heavy stone pulling her deeper into the abyss. Life in the monastery offers no real peace. Every day she battles relentless memories of her kidnapping. Her nights are haunted by nightmares, where darkness becomes her only companion. The sound of snapping branches jolts her awake, sweat soaking her skin as she clutches her ears, desperate to block out the echoes of her past. Every shadow cast on the stone walls sparks waves of panic, leaving her paralyzed by fear. The terror she endured has become a permanent part of her, a relentless specter she can never escape. Cindy no longer dreams of freedom or happiness. Her days are consumed by silent routines, and her nights stretch into endless nightmares. Her existence becomes one of quiet submission and isolation. Even the smallest sound, the rustling of robes, the creak of old doors, the echo of her own footsteps, sends chills down her spine. Memories of her captivity and torment play in an endless loop in her mind, each repetition more unbearable than the last. Realizing that the past will never release its grip on her, Cindy decides that the only way to find freedom is to end her existence. One bleak night, under a sky where the moon hides behind clouds, she makes her way to the abandoned wing of the monastery. There, silence reigns, thick with fear and sorrow. She finds an old, rusty razor that once belonged to a nun, and her heart pounds in her chest as she holds it. With a final breath, Cindy reflects on her life, her family left behind, the fear that still stalks her, and the hopelessness that has woven itself into every part of her being. She understands now that the freedom she sought was never within reach. She presses the blade against her skin, feeling a strange release from the weight that has burdened her soul for so long. And in that moment, as life slips away from her, she realizes the bitter truth. Even in death, peace will elude her. The shadow of her past will follow her, relentless and unforgiving. Thank you for watching this chilling story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on new terrifying tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, true freedom can sometimes be an illusion.